Welcome to another episode of the P4P Boxing Report. I am your host, Michael. Along with me again is my co-host, Kent, and joining us from Taiwan. And Sean just reminded me that he's in Taiwan right now. Sean Newton, how you guys doing this evening?
Good. How you doing?
Doing good. For those who are new to the P4P Boxing Report, the P4P Boxing Report is a show / blog / podcast that discusses all things boxing. The motto is, when boxing is good, we will talk about it. When boxing is bad, we will talk about it. The bottom line is, if it concerns boxing, we will talk about it. If you want to find out more information on the P4P Boxing Report and where to find us all over the internet and all over social media, two main places you can go. You can go to the official blog page. The address for that is p4pboxingreport.wordpress.com. Let me repeat that, p4pboxingreport.wordpress.com, where you can find blogs, blog posts by yours truly, and episodes of the P4P Boxing Report, podcasts, and also other news and videos boxing related. You can also go to the podcast page, and the link for that is p4pboxingreport.podomatic.com. Let me repeat that, p4pboxingreport.podomatic.com, where you can find all previous episodes of the P4P Boxing Report podcast. Be sure to check out the podcast, because you will not only hear us running our mouths talking about the sweet science, but you also hear some added music that will put in the podcast, so for you to enjoy. On the podcast page and on the blog page, you can find not only past episodes of the P4P Boxing Report podcast and blogs by yours truly. You can find links to where to find us all over the internet, all over the interweb, social media, links to where to find us on Twitter, where to find us on YouTube, where to find us on Facebook, Google+, WordPress, Podomatic, Tumblr, Pinterest, the RSS feed for the show, and a link where you can donate your account. Be a friend, be a pal, be a buddy, and donate your Twitter account. The link for that is donateyouraccount.com/P4P Boxing Report. Let me repeat that, donateyouraccount.com/P4P Boxing Report. And what happens is, any tweet that comes from the P4P Boxing Report Twitter page, and the Twitter handle for the P4P Boxing Report is at P4P Boxing Report. Any tweet that comes from the P4P Boxing Report Twitter page, your Twitter account will have the ability to automatically retweet any tweet that comes from the P4P Boxing Report Twitter page. With those homework matters out the way, let's get started with the show tonight, fellas. Do a recap of what went down in boxing this past weekend. Headline, of course, by what could be considered the upset of the year so far in 2014. Part of a doubleheader, HBO doubleheader at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, headlined by Chris Algieri. 12-round decision win, controversial to many. It's the win over Ruslan Provodnikov to win the WBO junior welterweight title. I'll get into it, because before the show we've had a hot debate on this fight. Let's just say two of us thought that Algieri could have got the decision, and one of us thought that Provodnikov won all the way. Provodnikov scored 2 knockdowns in round 1, caused severe swelling over Algieri's right eye, I believe it was. It's caused to get swollen shut. But it was a case of styles. What do you like? Provodnikov, he landed the harder shots, he landed the bigger shots. But Algieri, he landed more shots. He was busier and more active throughout the fight. I'll go with you on this one, Sean. Since you're the one who agree with, I guess, with many, feeling that Provodnikov won the fight, your assessment of what went down, and your thoughts on the fight, and why you feel that Ruslan Provodnikov won.
From Taiwan, it really looked like Ruslan won. But maybe, I'm so far away. Ruslan did what we knew he was going to do. He was going to go in there to try to knock Algieri's head off. It looked like he was going to be successful early, but it turned out that Algieri had a lot of heart and did well. But as far as I saw, I thought that all the harder punches were landed by Ruslan. He hurt Algieri not just in the first round, where he knocked him down twice, but he hurt them 3 or 4 times throughout the fight in other rounds. And luckily, Algieri showed lots of heart, and lots of the times it was at the end of the round, so he was able to survive or not fall down and make it so obvious that he was hurt. He continued to move a lot, which made it harder for Ruslan to hit him, but he was still getting hit. And his movement, I think, mask the fact that a lot of times he was moving because he was hurt. I can understand that people thought Algieri won, but I think a lot of times when a guy survives, he gets more credit than he necessarily deserves.
What was your score?
I didn't specifically do scorecards, but I think I had Ruslan winning by 4 rounds.
Go to Kent. While Sean believes that Ruslan won and won emphatically, I believe that Algieri. I'm on the minority opinion here. I agree with Andre Ward's assessment of the fight and thought Algieri, he won it in a close manner. I believe you felt that there's an argument that could be made that Algieri won the fight too. Your analysis of what went down Saturday in Barclays.
I'll be honest. I thought Ruslan got off to a great start. I felt he dominated round 1. He did very, very well in round 2. And then from that point on, it seemed like he did well and he did good in most of the rounds. It just seemed like that Algieri was able to stay with him. He was busier. He threw punches. If you look at the punch stat numbers, even though Algieri's punches weren't as hard or as telling, he was still landing shots. I mean, there were little ones here and there. He landed a lot of jabs. I just felt like he was able to keep the fight about on level terms in most of the rounds. I mean, it depends on what you liked. I thought it was a very, very close fight. I mean, I had it 113-113. I'm going to be honest. I could see somebody saying, well, Algieri won the fight. But then I could see somebody saying, well, I thought Provodnikov won the fight because it was that type of fight. It was volume versus power shots. And usually that presents a difficult task for judges, especially when the rounds are close. You have to make a determination on what you like. And I think, that's what it came down to in this fight. They liked Algieri's output and work rate, and and if you look at the numbers, I mean, there were, like, if you break down the rounds, there was a lot of rounds where Algieri outlanded Provodnikov. Provodnikov landed the harder punches, but Algieri was able to land more, even though they weren't as telling or even eye-popping. So it presents a very, very difficult situation for judges, especially in those type of fights. That being said, I didn't agree with Steve Weisfeld's assessment of the fight. I've always thought he was a very poor judge. When he was actually an active judge, not doing this little gig on HBO, I thought he was a poor judge to begin with. I don't think very highly of him.
Yeah, so, for those who do not know, he had to fight 117-109. That means that he had Provodnikov winning 9 rounds to 3. And for me, I'm sorry, I just don't see it. I can see why people think Provodnikov won the fight, but I just don't think he won. For those who thought he won, I just don't think he won by that wide of a margin. I just don't see it.
No, I don't see it either. I don't have any problem with somebody saying, he won 114-112, even a little bit of a stretch of 115-111. I don't have a problem with that. But at the same time, I just don't understand. I mean, you know what? I'm going to say this. There was a lot of rounds in the fight where there wasn't any, to me, in my perspective, there was a lot of rounds that you can make a case for both guys. I'm not saying that, I'll be honest, I don't think Algieri, I don't think he did enough to win rounds clearly. I'll be honest. But it's a determination. It's what you like more. And I think that if I could see somebody saying, well, Provodnikov, won rounds, I mean, clear. I could see that, and I could see where somebody thought, you know, they were on the fence and they edged it to Algieri. I don't see Algieri winning any of the rounds clear. Any of the rounds he won very clearly. I think it was just a determination of what you liked more. I think Provodnikov, there were several rounds that he won clearly. Rounds 1, round 2. I thought he also won round 7 clearly. And then there was some other rounds you could make a case he won clearly as well. But it's all determination. It's all about what you like. And I don't think it was anything to do with corruption. I think it was just a very close fight, a very, you know, fight that could have gone either way. But we have a group of Provodnikov fans that once again show themselves every time he loses a tough fight and say that he's robbed. Listen, Chris Algieri makes no money for boxing, whether he wins or loses. Nobody's going to go out of their way to make sure he win at all costs for him to win a fight. I just don't see that. And you can make the same case for Mauricio Herrera, a fight that Provodnikov, a close fight that could have went either way and he was on the wrong end of. The only fight that you can make an argument that he lost clearly was Tim Bradley. Other than that, they were all close fights. They were all disputed fights in some sort of way. And that's usually how Provodnikov is probably going to lose from here on out. He's just simply not going to do enough in some of those fights to get the nod from a judge.
Yeah, I know you have a response. I know you got a response to that, given you how you fought Provodnikov won the fight. And to Kent's point, there was a lot of folks, even I, in the days following the bout, had a debate with folks on social media, on Facebook in particular, feeling that Provodnikov won and won easy. Provodnikov, he raised hell after the bout, basically saying it was a conspiracy.
No, he's just, you know what he's doing? He's just raising hell for a rematch. That's all he's doing. I'm sure he doesn't believe that one bit.
Well, he was, let's just say he was raising hell, felt like something was run amok with the decision. I'll give you, Sean, since you feel you're the one here who thinks that Provodnikov won, I'll give you a chance to respond to what Ken was saying.
Well, I mean, you can just see what Ken said. I mean, he thinks it was a close fight, depending on what styles you like, whether you like a boxer that throws volume or a puncher that throws the harder, more effective punches. So depending on what school you come from, you can see that it could be considered a close fight. But then at the same time, there are no rounds clearly that Algieri won, where there are clearly rounds that Ruslan won. So I mean, from my perspective, it's pretty clear that Ruslan won the fight. But I can understand how people that are boxing fans love boxing, the style, the skill, the art. You know, I understand they love everything that's boxing. Avoiding
hey, now you remember the host of this show is one of those boxing fans now, so.
I know, but the host I don't get in big debates on the YBC for. So I mean, I just mean, you know, there's lots of people that like boxing. They like boxing, whether it's this style or that style. You know, there's certain fighters that they like who fights this style. There's certain fighters they like that fight that style. They're not like across the board one way of thinking. There's many people that love to criticize casual fans. Everybody is a casual fan if they don't agree with you. You know, it's a close fight. I hope there's a rematch so we can get a definitive winner. From my perspective,
say this right now. I don't usually call most fans who I disagree with casual fans, but I feel like some fans who do watch boxing and disagree, I think sometimes they don't understand judging. I think sometimes.
I think that's the case with even people that are serious boxing fans, you know, because perspectives change all the time. Like we said earlier, you know, in the Marquez-Manny 4 fight, you know, many people justified Marquez winning that fight because he landed
You mean the third fight? You mean the third fight?
Oh, the third fight. He landed the cleaner shots, whereas Manny landed the majority of shots. But Marquez's shots were cleaner. So they used that as a way to talk about how he should have won the fight. So they dismissed volume. But then in a case like this fight, you know, they jump all over volume and dismiss like the cleaner, harder shots. You know, the problem is judging is subjective. And that's what I say on YouTube all the time when people argue. It's like, you can have your perspective, but I mean, it's subjective. You have judges that have a subjective way of seeing a fight. They do what they do. All you can do is be consistent so that people know how you judge a fight. And then they can see if you're being a hypocrite.
Yeah, for me, I just felt that simply after the first couple of rounds, I think Algieri found his sea leg, so to speak, and I just thought he was the more active fighter. I think that Provodnikov, over time, did not do a great job of cutting off the ring. He left the body while Algieri, say what you want about them being pity pat, the fact was I thought he landed effective shots. They hurt Provodnikov, no. But again, he was the active fighter. I don't think he was running or anything like that. I just felt that he won more rounds boxing, and I will concede you do have a point about judging being in many ways subjective instead of objective. But for me, I just felt that Algieri, he did enough over time. I just think he landed more punches. And he never gave Provodnikov the same pattern over time. He would do one thing, and then he would do another thing, and he would never did a third thing. He never gave Provodnikov a set pattern, and I think they kind of confused Provodnikov throughout the fight. Moving forward, you mentioned, I think it was either you, Sean, or Kent mentioned rematch. A lot of talk about there being a rematch. I personally think it is going to happen, if not later on this year, then early next year. Prospects on a rematch happening, and if it does happen, do you see anything changing? I'll go to you, Sean, and then you can follow up, Kent.
I think in a rematch that Algieri gets knocked out.
Simple as that. Kent?
I think in a rematch, because this will be Ruslan's first shot at a rematch, I think he will make sure that it won't get into the judge's hand, and I think he will do everything to make sure he knocks out Algieri. Whether that happens remains to be seen. But if I would say right now in a rematch, I'd give the edge to Provodnikov. I think he understands what he has to do now. This is the third time he's come up short. I think he's going to do everything to make sure this doesn't happen again. I would hope so, because if he comes up short again, his value is going to go down.
Yeah,
right now his value hasn't been lost, because if you look at the ratings for Boxing After Dark during his fight, it was over 1 million viewers. So he's still a guy that's wants to be seen by the public. But he can't keep losing these close fights. He's got to separate himself in one of these tough ones and win the fight, and show people that, hey, I can win a tough fight. Hey, I can win a fight that's on the table. And I think that's what's lacking in his and part of it too, I think also, I mean, I think he does well against certain fighters, Provodnikov. He's always going to do well against guys that come forward. We've seen him do spectacular things. Like, for example, we saw what he could do against Alvarado. We've seen what he can do, against... And remember, in the Alvarado fight, he was much busier than he was against Algieri. Much busier. So we have to see... he can't lose any more fights. I think this is the end of the rope for him as far as being an elite attraction. He's not really an elite attraction, but as far as TV goes, he is an attraction. But he has to be busier. He has to throw more punches, and I wouldn't be surprised if he knocked out Algieri in a rematch.
Yeah, that's the key. The key for me is I think Ruslan would do much better. I think part of the issue was that Ruslan kind of didn't fully respect Algieri going in. For those who don't know, he had his mind on bigger fights, particularly a fight with Brandon Rios. I think he was a little bit disappointed that he didn't get that fight, and it showed in the way he performed, how frustrated he got as the fight went along. And I think he will fight. Let me finish. Let me say it. I think he will fight with more initiative, and he has to be active. See, the problem in fights like this against boxers, whether it was this loss with Algieri, the loss to Guerrero, even the Bradley fight, which was fought in the year in 2013, he wasn't active enough. He didn't throw enough punches. He kind of settles. He may be guilty of fighting in spurts, and with what will be on the line in a possible rematch, I think he will correct that, and he will come out fighting with fire for 3 minutes of a round. And I think he will really fight with more force and more initiative in a rematch.
Yeah, I agree. I'm gonna also say one other thing. I'm friends with on Facebook on Ruslan's page. You know, so I see like what a lot of guys are doing, and I felt like going into the fight, he was, I think, a little bit distracted because once he got to New York, all he was doing was taking pictures of different sites and different things, you know. And I felt that maybe he was a little starstruck because this was his first opportunity on a big stage in New York. You know, it's overwhelming for a guy who came from a very small town in Siberia to be on this level, and that could have played with him as well. It could have distracted him. I'm not making excuses for him, but that I could see something like that coming into play. I could see the fact that he didn't get a bigger name coming into play. It sort of could have been a letdown. And personally, like looking back on it now, this wasn't a very smart fight to make. It was not a very good fight. I think they took what they could get. I was kind of shocked that they didn't, you know, try to get him a guy who comes forward to keep, you know, to keep the momentum going after the Alvarado win. But whatever the case may be, I think in a rematch he'll come back and make a real emphatic point. And I just don't see now looking back on it. I don't see the point of this. Didn't see the point of the fight. It was really bad matchmaking, I think, to some degree.
Yeah, so let's move on and talk about the main undercard of this HBO doubleheader, and that is Demetrius Andrade, WBO junior middleweight champion, making the first defense of his belt against mandatory contender Brian Rose. Look, when we talked about the fight, and I'll go to you on this, Ken. When we talked about this fight last week, we basically said this was going to be a fight in which a showcase fight for Andrade. And look, at the end of the day, Brian Rose, he wasn't really a title-worthy challenger. He was a mandatory guy, but that doesn't mean he was a title-worthy challenger. But to Andrade's credit, he did what he had to do. He impressed. He dominated and took this fight from moment one. Did whatever he wanted against Brian Rose. And again, despite the lack of competition, I like what I saw from him Saturday night.
Yeah, I did too, but you got to consider who he was fighting.
Right.
You got to consider who was in front of him. First of all, Brian Rose had no business in a title fight. I'm going to be honest with you. He had no business in that fight. Frankly, he was lucky to even win the fight to get into the title, into this fight. But I'm not going to go into that. If you want to know, if you want to watch and make your own determination, watch Javier Maciel versus Brian Rose and make your own determination of who won that fight. I thought Maciel won that fight, for what it's worth. That being said, I think Andrade did what he had to do. He did what he wanted. He controlled the fight. He boxed about as good as you could get against such a limited opponent. But I'm going to say this right now. There's about 10 junior middleweights sitting out there right now that would beat the pants off of Andrade. I'm going to be honest with you. I think he's a good fighter. He's a good, solid fighter, but I don't think he ever beats an elite junior middleweight. I don't think he beats a Charlo. I don't think he beats a Julian Williams. I don't think he beats, like a guy
Either
like
Charlo brother?
Nope.
Either Charlo brother?
Neither Charlo brother. Not even Julian Williams. Not Canelo. Not Lara. Not Austin Trout. Not even like a guy like Carlos Molina. I just do not see him doing anything outside of a certain level at junior middleweight. They're talking about him moving up to middleweight. He'll get trounced at middleweight. I just don't. I think he's a good fighter. I think he's a solid fighter, but I don't see anything special other than that.
Your thoughts on the fight Saturday night against Rose, Sean, and your assessment of Demetrius Andrade, the fighter?
I agree. I think this was just a fight to make him look good. to push his stock forward, which is smart. Unlike Ruslan, who had a guy that made him look bad, they put a guy in front of Demetrius Andrade that made him look good. Made him look like his offense was really versatile and pretty exciting. The problem that I have, and I agree with Kent, is that I think sometimes he's too stationary. He stands there and he's easy to counter. His hands are down, so I think he's going to get hit when he fights a higher level of competition. And it'd be interesting to see him in with somebody that has a higher level of skill. I don't dismiss him as being somebody that can't do something in that weight, but at this point, I haven't really seen him do anything that overly impresses me. Beating this guy doesn't impress me because he just did what he should do, and if he didn't do it, then I mean, we wouldn't need to watch him anymore. But hopefully his next fight, he will be in there against somebody that will show us what he really has when he faces somebody that actually can fight back.
When you look at the 160 landscape, you mentioned multiple fighters. When you look at his division, when you look at his the WBO rankings, I should say, of the top 5, only one real fighter of note. That is James Kirkland. Well, you got Canelo. I guess he's ranked number 2 by the WBO. I still consider him a champion. Even though he lost the belt to Floyd, I still consider him a champion, if you will.
I want to jump in real quick and say James Kirkland will also beat Andrade.
You think so?
Mm-hmm.
You don't think Kirkland is too one-dimensional?
I think Kirkland will drag him into. The fight, into his fight.
I was going to ask, given those fighters you mentioned, who should Andrade go for next? What big names do you see him? Do you guys want him to fight at 154 or 160? Because I think personally he struggles to make the weight.
I think he should fight Kirkland. That would be an exciting fight. And I mean, like you said, he is sort of one-dimensional. You know what he's bringing, so if you can't prepare for him, then you don't deserve to be an elite-level fighter. I mean, he can be beat, and if you're such a good boxer, it should be easy enough. But, like I said, he gets hit, and a guy like Kirkland is going to test him and see what he has. So we'll find out quick if he passes the litmus test.
Your thoughts, Ken?
I think he should either fight James Kirkland, and I also got another name that comes to mind, Willie Nelson. Willie Nelson is the type of guy that could make...
Give some background on him, on Willie Nelson.
Willie Nelson is I believe he's 22-1, but he's a tall guy, he's a rangy guy, but he gives up his height a lot, and he doesn't have the greatest chin in the world, and that's the type of fight that would make Andrade look really, really good, because he gives away his height, and that makes a fight with Andrade very easy for Demetrius, because he can just use his boxing skill and just outbox him. I think he would outbox the mess out of Nelson. I think he should stay away from Kirkland. He may outbox Kirkland. It's not unlikely, but I just think that Kirkland has this mentality where he drags you into his fight. He doesn't allow you to establish your fight. He makes you establish his fight, and that's why I think that he's such a difficult guy to deal with. Kirkland. Yeah, Kirkland's not the most skilled guy, but he finds a way to drag people into his fight. So that's why I think that's a dangerous fight. Willie Nelson would be a safer fight. Even Andy Lee would be a decent fight.
Smith.
Ishe Smith. That's a bore. That's a real bore. We're gonna sit there and watch, and we're all gonna go to sleep. And at the end of the day, I can't watch Ishe Smith because he makes every fight boring. It's not exciting. I mean, if I want to see Andrade fight, I want to see him fight a guy like I'll even take a fight with Kirkland. Willie Nelson, or even Andy Lee. Those will be exciting fights.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on. Talk about the news. Normally we give a news topic of the day or of the week, But I want to use this new segment to have like a roundtable discussion. I was at a graduation last week, and afterwards we having a little brunch thing, whatever, and boxing came up. I was doing some networking and stuff and talking about the show and whatever, sharing information about the show and all that, and we got into a discussion about boxing, and one of the folks who I was with had a series of questions about the status of American boxing. He was asking about where had all the American heavyweights gone. He was asking which American boxers outside of Floyd, outside of Andre Ward and whatnot, and Hopkins, who are the American fighters that we should watch, and who are the American fighters on the rise. And he was asking also about the status of amateur boxing based on the nonsensical performance, the ridiculous performance of the United States amateur boxing team in 2012 and 2008. And I want to use that to have a roundtable discussion about the status of American boxing. I want to go to you on this, kid. I have my assumptions. I have my ideas about the status of the American heavyweight. Look, right now you got two prominent American heavyweights, Brian Jennings, Deontay Wilder. But outside of that, you really have no one who's captured the public's imagination. Your rationale for the lack of prominent American heavyweights, the plethora of American heavyweights that you saw in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s in particular. Why? I'll have my opinion and I'll give my thoughts on it after you can. But your thoughts on the lack of the American heavyweight?
I think I'm going to tell you right now, there are heavyweight prospects in America out there. We're just not covered. If you're not with a big promoter, they're not going to cover you. Okay?
Give some names.
I'll give you an example. There's a guy named Charles Martin. He's 17-0 with 15 knockouts. He doesn't have a big promoter. He fights every other month. No one knows who he is. And he's a very good fighter. He's a tall guy. He's a southpaw. He delivers knockouts. He gives you what you want to see. He's exciting. And I sit there and I say to myself, this guy should be on TV. But then we got guys like I don't know if anybody's ever seen Gerald Washington. But
I've heard of him, but I hadn't seen him yet.
He's a heavyweight prospect, and this guy, he throws no punches. He's just not aesthetically pleasing to watch. I mean, he's a decent heavyweight, but he's not going to captivate the American public. And then he's really tall, but he has no, listen, Gerald Washington has no aggression whatsoever. There's nothing there inside of him to suggest he's going to capture the imagination of America. I think there's another guy, Dominic Vasyl, that I think he could. He has an exciting style. I don't know how far he's going to go. His build and his physique are something to be desired. But at the same time, he can be somebody that people can get excited about because of his style. He's hit and get hit. That's what people want to see. And there's other heavyweight prospects out there that are probably a little bit further down the line that are still building their way up. But I think the guys that we should really pay attention to, I think out of the ones I've mentioned off the top of my head, are probably Charles Martin and Dominic Vasyl. I think those are the guys that you're going to hear a lot more about. I think right now they're just building their career, and you're going to see Gerald Washington too, because he's with Al Heyman, and I don't know why Al's invested in such a uncharismatic guy. At least I could say for Vasyl, he's charismatic. Charles Martin is charismatic. If you want to watch some of Charles Martin's fights, you can go on YouTube. A bunch of his fights are out there. A lot of them are camcorder version of the fights because he's basically fighting on shows, that are local, and he's just trying to build his name, and he keeps winning, and he's already beaten like 3 or 4 undefeated guys who are in the same position he's in. So he's a guy I would definitely watch out for. That's the guy I think that's going to be a name to see in the future.
Your thoughts on, oh gosh, what's his name? Oh, I can't think of his name, but I'll follow up and ask you a question. There's been a prevailing theory that I kind of believe that the problem, one of the reasons that we don't see the number of heavyweights, American heavyweights, is because they've gone to football, they've gone to basketball in particular. Your thoughts on that theory, that because of football and because of basketball, the popularity of football and basketball, the NBA and NFL, college football, college basketball, that is taking away the big guys that we used to see that would have been in boxing, say 30, 40, even 20 years ago. Your thoughts on that? You can follow up with that, Sean.
I think it's funny because Dominic Vasyl was a football player, and he turned over to boxing, and he ended up making the Olympic team. So I definitely see. Look at Seth Mitchell, another football player, went to boxing. No, he's not a very good fighter, but the point remains that there are guys who come over to, from other sports into boxing. You got the guy from the football player that used to play with I forgot what team it was, but I'm trying to remember his name. He's from Minnesota. I don't know how good he is. I think he's all right, but if I remember,
oh gosh, I know who you're talking about. I can't remember his name though.
Yeah, one of his most notorious fights is a guy that essentially didn't take a punch and took a dive in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in the Midwest. And the point is, there are guys who do come over from other sports into boxing, but you rarely see them be successful. I think Vasyl will be successful simply because he was able to get to a international level with his, in his amateur career. And there's other guys out there, I mean, that probably that are in other sports right now that probably could have been very good boxers. They just chose that are a different route because there's a lot of money in basketball and football and even hockey. There's money in those sports. And when you get money in baseball, if you throw them enough money, they're going to play that sport and they're going to forget, Look at Tommy Zibulkowski. Not a very good fighter, but the point is he went to a sport where it was going to make him money. I mean, he had an amateur career. He had about 60 or 70 amateur fights, mostly local fights, but and then you have another example of a guy who was a football player that went to boxing, Mike Lee. He's not a heavyweight, but the point is he went from football to boxing, but you rarely see them be successful when they go into that sport and then come back. It's rare when it happens.
I'll go to you, Sean. Your thoughts on the status of the American heavyweight and a common theory that the reason you don't see the number of the plethora of heavyweights today is because they're going into the NBA and the NFL pursuing football and basketball careers.
Well, I don't know if that's a fair argument because most of the people that do those sports are involved in team sports. So they're people that are gravitated towards playing as a team. Boxers have always been individuals, people that have been more focused on themselves. It's a sport where it's up to the individual. So I think a lot of the problem stems from just grassroots. If you're not getting these guys when they're really young, then they're not developing. You can take big guys, but that doesn't mean he's going to be a great boxer, like Kent was saying with a lot of football players that have transitioned over. Historically as well, Too Tall Jones, Herschel Walker, whoever. I mean,
Mark Gastineau. Good lord.
Yeah, Mark Gastineau. All these guys are great athletes.
Another football player, the running back for Houston, that was
Alonzo Highsmith.
Alonzo Highsmith. Although Alonzo Highsmith, for what it's worth, he was a lot better fighter than Gastineau.
Yeah, he wasn't. Oh, Gastineau was terrible.
But I mean, he did have the skill. Highsmith did have more skill.
But that's the problem. To be a great boxer, you need to have fundamentals. You need to start when you're young. I mean, historically, a lot of these guys were pushed young, went through the amateur program, to represent in the Olympics, because Olympic boxing was pushed in the States, and people that came back with Olympic gold medals were heroes, and they had like the red carpet treatment. Big promoters signed them, especially big guys. And I mean, the problem now, you don't see that so much. These guys are sort of ignored initially, and that probably doesn't make it such an interesting thing to go into. And a lot of these other guys... Go.
I was going to interject. Sorry for interrupting. Do you think the lack of gyms, because boxing gyms are not what they were, you don't see them all over the place like you used to, do you think that plays a role?
Obviously. I mean, socioeconomics plays a big part in boxing. It always has. You know, people that come from low socioeconomic situations don't play sports like football, where generally you come from a program that has money to fund such a big program. So you come from an area that doesn't have school systems that have all this funding. You come from an economic situation where the only thing maybe you have for you is basketball outside, because it doesn't cost anything to play, or going to the gym where you have good role models, your friends are there, it's close and it's open and it's easy to go, and if you don't have money, it doesn't cost you anything to go. You know, the way they sort of do it, a lot of it was just you pay what you can afford. Like when I used to go to the gym, I mean, depending on how much money you had, you paid how much money you could afford. So it depended on the individual. You know, I think obviously that has a huge effect. I mean, a lot of these guys don't have this sort of outlet because of the way things are changing, you know, in these areas, which impact that kind of thing. And then as well, as we were saying, just the way the other sports get highlighted a lot more, whereas boxing, you know, since Tyson, when has there been like somebody that's been a huge persona in boxing? Floyd Mayweather, you know, fine. I mean, he's a huge personality, but I mean, he's a small man. Small men always have got into boxing because they are small men. You know, they need to protect themselves. They've got into something like that, like hand-to-hand combat at an early age to be able to deal with themselves. Big guys, lots of times they don't have people bother them. So what has that been their motivation to start something like that?
You want to follow up on that, kid? Maybe how the lack of the role of the lack of gyms has played the role into the dearth of heavyweights, American heavyweights.
I think that's one thing. Also, I think nowadays we have a lot of small gyms. We don't have the big gym anymore. You know what I'm saying? Like
no Fifth Street gym, or in Miami, for instance, or no. What was the big prominent gym in New York back in the day? Gleason's and whatever.
Gleason's used to be a lot bigger, actually.
Yeah.
And you had a lot of fighters go in and out of there. And that's where I think a lot of the, you know, and then also you have used to have the military that used to have boxing programs. They still do over in Europe, the military. That's where a lot of the great amateur fighters in Europe go through, the military system. And they're groomed in there, and they become fighters. Also, the prison system used to produce fighters.
Yes.
And now that seems to be lacking. So all the things that used to produce fighters is non-existent now.
In colleges.
States. And you know, and the funny thing is, with the prison system is that can teach you, you know, like discipline and all the good core values that you should do when you're outside in the real world. And
Exhibit A, Bernard Hopkins.
Yeah, there you go. And look at the guy that just won a world title from Thailand.
Rung Roy.
Yeah, Rung Roy went through the prison system. And look where he is. He's a world champion now, and that's what they do in Thailand. A lot of there's even a female world champion in Thailand that went through the prison system, and she sold drugs, and they got her in the boxing program, and she became, you know, they developed her talent. She became a world champion. So at the end of the day, there are systems like that exist. It just doesn't seem to be in the United States anymore. And I'll tell you, in Europe, they produce a ton of fighters because they groom these kids from an early age. They have an eye for talent. the systems over there, especially because a lot of them are funded by the government, they have an eye for talent, and they see something that could be beneficial to them. They're going to recruit them into that and make them, you know, into you know, something successful, you know, in whatever field that they're in. So whether it be in athletics or whatever, that's what a lot of these countries do. Like a lot of countries outside the U.S.
But you know, when you mention the prison system, you have folks out there, and I hate to get political here, where it says, well, prisons should they defund it, and it should be about, and they have this attitude of the prison system should be more about punishment than it should be about rehabilitation and all that, and they see no need for boxing in the prison system or anything like that.
You know what?
Which I hate to get on a political rant, but I'm hollering BS on that kind of nonsense all day long.
Okay, so if we didn't have the prison system, we wouldn't have a guy like, you know, like some of the heavyweight champions or heavyweight contenders we've had in recent history, or even look at Ron Lyle, product of the prison system, became a boxer, became an amateur boxer, represented his country, became a top contender. I mean, look. I'll give another example. It's a poor example, but fucking Clifford Etienne, he went through the prison system and became a boxer. I mean, it's a poor example, but that's where they found him in prison. That's where they found Clifford Etienne, in prison. But other than that, we have not produced anything from the prison system in a while. I mean, that there's no systems to get these people into some positive outlet. I'm not saying you should go to prison, okay? But if you do go to prison, there needs to be an outlet for these people to be productive citizens. Because most of them, when they get released from prison, they're going back to prison. They get back into trouble and they go back to prison. That's all it is. That is all that they're doing. They're not producing. The guy that had this. Who was the guy that had the fight shown?
Oh,
wasn't Jumbo Cummings another guy that was in the prison system?
Mm-hmm.
That fringe heavyweight contender back in the day for Frank Bruno. Was he another guy that was produced from the prison system?
Was Kwawe the same way, or
What?
Kwawe?
He may have. I don't remember, but I remember they used to have a lot of the cards shown from the prisons. Remember?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't understand why this can't be, at least rethought of. You know what happened? They used to do it at Rahway State Prison in Jersey over here. And eventually the new guy that came in who was in charge basically said, no more. No more, and they got rid of it. I believe James Scott was the guy that was, yes, that's right, Sean. It was James Scott. They used to show his fights at Rahway State Prison, and then the new, I guess it's the guy that was the guy that runs the prison eventually said no more boxing, and that was it. And that was the end of James Scott.
Like I said, there's a lot of politics that's kind of just BS and ridiculous on why they keep boxing out of the prison systems, and with things are getting defunded all over the place. You don't have the gyms, you don't have it in schools anymore, it's not in colleges anymore, and I think all that, as well as as athletes moving on to other sports, has played a role in why you don't see any prominent heavyweights. So I'm going to go to you, Sean, and talk about this next question. What in the world has happened to the U.S. amateur boxing system? You have not had a medalist from the U.S. system since. I know you had it in '96. I believe you had it in 2000, but you hadn't had any medalists since.
The last medalist was 2008, but it wasn't a gold medalist.
Let me clarify that. You had Clarissa Shields. You have to acknowledge her. She won a gold medal in women's boxing in 2012 in London. But for men, and we have to acknowledge that. But for men, from the men's side, put it this way: to me, I think amateur boxing for women is in a much better state than the amateur boxing, United States amateur boxing for men. I'll go to you on this, Sean. Is it coaching? Is it style? Again, lack of funding, as we talk about with the prison system in connection to the lack of heavyweights. What has happened to the United States amateur system? Because to me, it just needs a complete overhaul. It needs to be deconstructed, reconstructed.
Well, I think they need to fix amateur boxing overall, not just in the States, but the whole game of amateur boxing now is
and let me interrupt. And what do you think the role of AIBA and that corrupt, as far as I'm concerned, that corrupt outfit has played a role in United States boxing?
I don't know enough about them to comment, but I mean, you can just look at the last Olympics and see how apathetic everybody was to amateur boxing. I mean, regardless of who was fighting, you know, the whole style that they're using as far as scoring and everything else has made it boring and dull, where it's not exciting anymore. I mean, they barely even show the fights when you watch televised Olympics coverage anymore. Whereas before, I mean, it was one of the main things you used to watch, that and track and field. You know, I think they need to go back to old scoring judging where, I mean, body punches count and where, I mean, you make it much more exciting, where it becomes less guys afraid to throw punches and just base everything on countering. You know, I was very disappointed with the Olympics overall. And I think what we were talking about before, I mean, the lack of gyms, the lack of funding, these things have all hurt the amateur program. And maybe not having a name. I know Freddie Roach was a little involved. I'm not sure exactly what the extent of it was, but having a name like him who focused primarily on amateur boxing for elite level guys would be great, because his name and celebrity would bring a lot of attention and extra money to the program, which would help produce better fighters, which in turn would have guys win medals, which in turn would make name boxers become something that people are used to, which would just sort of get the whole cycle going. I mean, remember the days where you had 8 guys come from the U.S. program that were all champions and great. Pernell Whitaker, Meldrick Taylor, Holyfield, Breland. I mean,
greatest U.S. team ever.
It was ridiculous. And, you know, you can't say just because these guys were so great, because, you know, some of them didn't necessarily have the physical abilities. Some did, of course, but other ones, I mean, it was just good skills from an early age and brought along well. And they were just all great fighters. And it's just it's a shame because, I mean, if you love boxing, we sort of miss out on all these young up-and-comers that we can get excited about at an early age. I mean, now Britain has their one guy who's being pushed a lot, and it's exciting to see what he develops into, the big heavyweight guy.
Anthony Joshua.
But you got to also remember they have a lot of other fighters that flipped pro at the lighter weight classes that they're building too. That were
the gold medalists who won at bantamweight. So yeah.
Yeah, you got guys like like Thomas Stalker and guys like that who made a name for themselves in the amateur scene, and they're starting out now. So I think, yeah, you have to have a system that produces fighters. If you don't have a system that produces constantly, you're not gonna have successful on the amateur level. And this is the thing with me. Back in 2012, okay, me and Mike did shows, I mean, during the Olympics, and it was really disgraceful. I mean, we had to sit there and actually dissect and tear up like the whole thing, and then shoot down AIBA for their corruption. And then you had a guy like Teddy Atlas. Oh my God! It makes me so angry to even talk about this when he was going around talking shit about the system during broadcasts, and the judges were hearing this. He was just ripping into the judges, and he was creating an environment where the American journalism for the amateur boxing during the Olympics was becoming disliked. And eventually they got the AIBA and the whole thing got annoyed and said, well, we're going to push you back further because we don't want to listen to you. And then you know, Teddy Atlas blew a screw, and he said, then if we have to move back, then I'm not broadcasting. And then that was the end of that. So I think the U.S. not only have they brought negative attention based on the fact they haven't produced medals, but it's the individuals who are supposed to be, you know, well thought out and people who are broadcasting who are tearing the system apart and doing it in such an improper manner, like Teddy Atlas did. No one can tell me that was proper what he did. That was completely out of line the way he did. I understand your frustration about the system. If he was so frustrated, why didn't he do something to change it instead of bitching and complaining and having, you know, the judges hear it? I mean, because they're just the judges. You know what I'm saying? They don't have to listen to that nonsense. Why hasn't he done anything more than what he's done? That's the whole thing with me.
Any other follow-up, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's important to fund these programs, especially for the younger kids and getting them involved early. And it would be good if the people that financially profit from it are part of the people involved in the solution. I mean, you want to see promoters who end up taking these Olympic fighters to become champions and promote them, put some money in. Like if you like college basketball or just basketball like me, you see that now, I mean, from the early stages, you know, outside investors are trying to get involved so that they can develop these players, because obviously down the line these players are going to benefit them. It sort of has to be the same way. I mean, if public money can't fund these programs, then it should be the people who benefit the most, which are promoters like Al Heyman or, you know, Don King, you know, Bob Arum, Golden Boy. I mean, for Golden Boy, it would be an excellent thing for them to do. I mean, especially in California-based boxing, if they would like sort of push a program there.
But the problem is that AIBA, they got such issues and they got such a stronghold.
They want to be in the pro boxing game. That's the scary thing.
Yeah, and I don't think that they will allow such a thing to happen. I really don't.
Listen, the way AIBA talks, they're like, they're it. They're like, you know, they're like, we're gonna do it whether you like it or not. And I know there's professional promoters, like real professional, that laugh at it because they think it's ridiculous. You know, you got people in there that are, you know, they're corrupt. They want to. Like, the part I don't get is, like, the World Series of Boxing, that, I think, is a litmus test to see if AIBA can get into pro boxing. Because it is pro boxing because they're accepting money to fight. But none of those guys were produced by AIBA. Those were produced by the national federations, the gyms. They the ones that deserve the credit. Did they produce Vasyl Lomachenko? No. Did they produce any of the guys that fought in that, you know, in that league? No. All the countries that have produced all the countries and coaches, and those are the national. Those are the ones that produce those fighters, not AIBA. AIBA is just trying to piggyback off of them. See the corruption? They want to piggyback off of this and benefit off of the work of all these individual countries, you know, and just do the right thing. What they should be doing is should be the right thing, not piggybacking off of the work of others. I just want to comment one more thing about the heavyweight boxing. There's a site if you want to follow, like, the 100 top, like, this guy every month he kind of does like a top 100 heavyweight boxing prospects, and I think it's really cool that he does it. I mean, I don't agree with his rankings per se, but I think it's a good idea to keep everybody abreast of the heavyweight situation, both in the pro level and the amateur level. I'm gonna copy the link, and maybe you could post it on the bottom of when you post it so everybody can check that out.
Yeah, and what I'll do is I'll promote it. I'll post the link. Okay, boxingblogspot.com. For those who are listening, who will be listening to the podcast and who are listening live on
It is.
YouTube.
It is. It's boxning.
Also boxning.blogspot.com, and what I'll do is I'll post it.
He's from Sweden, but he does top 100 heavyweights in both like the pro, and then he follows the amateur game in case a lot of these guys go pro. So he keeps everybody. It's a great blog actually. So and then they have the U.S. rank. Like if you want to look for the U.S. heavyweight prospects, you can look on that list. You'll find them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll to you with this last question on the roundtable. With this discussion I was having last week at this brunch, he was at a guy who I was talking to. He was asking me who are the upcoming American fighters that we should keep our eye on. And of course, I was mentioning the Gary Russell Jr.'s of the world, considering how he will look against Lomachenko, and we will talk about that fight coming up in the fight previews. I was talking about Terrence Crawford, the welterweights, Porter, Thurman. I was mentioning Andrade. We still don't know about him. The Charlo brothers. Those are kind of guys that we know about for us boxing heads who follow the sport on a regular basis. We know about those guys. I want you to give a few names of some other fighters that might not be so known, contenders, prospect, guys who are in the amateur system right now, or maybe coming right out of the amateur system. Give the people out there some fighters, American fighters, who we should keep our eye on.
I think you should keep an eye on this guy, Julian Williams, who gets absolutely no fanfare whatsoever. He's already explained the reason why he doesn't get attention is because he doesn't have a twin brother.
Let the folks know what division and all that he's in.
He fights at 154 pounds. This kid he can box, he can punch, he can do it all. He's improved so much in the last 18 months. I think he's going to be a world champion. I mean, he's just not a marketable guy because he doesn't have a certain thing. Like he's pointing out the Charlos, because they're both twins, they get more attention. But I think if you looked at a long-term investment, it would be Julian Williams. I think he can be a very, very, very well-known name if moved correctly. He's from Philadelphia. He has an interesting story, and I think he's a very, very marketable guy because the way he knocks people out. I mean, his last fight he fought a pretty tough guy, and he ended up flattening him in like the 7th round, and he looked spectacular doing it, and I think that's a guy that should get attention. There's also a couple other guys, like Porter. I think it can be somebody that's if moved the right way and marketed the right way, he can be a name. I think Charles Martin can be moved and made a name if done right, but the problem is nobody seems to know who he is and nobody seems to care. Even though he's 17-0 with 15 knockouts, he's gotten not one bit of press by anyone. Not even on a national level or anything. But he's in there fighting once a month or once every other month. I mean, he had fought an undefeated guy that was 14-0. He knocked him out in the 3rd round, and then like less than a month later, he was in there fighting again, and he knocked him out in the 1st round. So he's keeping busy. He's doing what he has to do. And those are guys that people should be following. There's countless other guys that you can look up. I mean, you just have to keep an eye on like a lot of what I would do is personally, if you want to know like who's the hot guys out there, is you try to follow the guys that are undefeated. Like you look them up. Try to find the guys that are undefeated, like on BoxRec, and follow their careers and try to find out what their amateur pedigree is, and I got another link for that, and I will make sure that's posted as well. There's another link, and you can look up the fighters themselves. You can put it in the search bar, and they have all their amateur results or whatever amateur results they have, and you can look it up, and it gives you an idea, what kind of pedigree they have. And that's important, I think, for even like for U.S. boxing, and even on the world stage. It's important to know who the prospects are. It's important to know who's up and coming, because a lot of guys don't know because there's so much going on that they don't have time to look at prospects and whatnot. But I think that's important to know who's coming up in the game. And I think what I would recommend, like I've said, look up their amateur background, look on BoxRec in the different weight classes, find the names, not anybody who's a champion, but like somebody who's coming up that's 8-0, 9-0, 10-0. Look up what their amateur pedigree is and find out if they're legit or not, and go from there. That's the best thing I can give people right now.
Any fighters that come to mind when we talk about who are the fighters to watch out in the future? Jesse Vargas is also another guy at 140. There's also a fighter by the name of Zapata, 19-0 guy, 140 pounds. What guys who you would recommend, Sean, in terms of guys to keep an eye on, American guys to keep an eye on?
I think we lost Sean.
Okay, I didn't. Oh yeah, he's left. Let me write him right back. So, but yeah, you was mentioning BoxRec. I didn't see him. He's left the chat. I'm gonna try to invite him back on so we can have him on for the do the fight preview. But you was mentioning BoxRec. You mentioned it, but give the folks who are listening, who will be listening, particularly the podcast, maybe listening at work or sometime, give the link for BoxRec and see what's happening for those who know
if you
about
want to look up BoxRec, it's a pretty well-known site in the boxing community. It's www.boxrec.com. That's where you can go and look up everybody's record. It's not it's complete for the most part. It's not extremely complete, but it's as complete of a system as we can get right now without you paying for Fight Facts. And I would never recommend paying for Fight Facts. It's very expensive. Fight Facts is actually the actual quote-unquote official record keeper. This is about as close as the official you can get is BoxRec. So I would check that out. I would check out the blog with the heavyweight prospects, which is boxning.blogspot.com, and that's where they had the heavyweight. And I'll have another link that I'll make sure that Michael gets for to look up amateur stuff. So I'll make sure that's posted when the blog is posted. I'll make sure those links are posted under there.
Okay, let's talk about the fights that's coming up this weekend. There is a big card on Showtime, headlined by Return of Raw, following his loss to Floyd Mayweather. He's set to return in the ring against Yoshihiro Kamegai. Also on that card is the fight between Vasyl Lomachenko, who lost to Salido for the WBO belt. He's set to return to the ring against Guerrero Jr. Also, you have Devon Alexander, former welterweight champion. He's going to be fighting on that card. And return of Chad Dawson, lost to Adonis Stevenson. He's set to fight on that card as well. Let's talk about the main event: Guerrero versus Kamegai. I've seen Kamegai fight. He fought on I think he fought on Friday Night Fights. He's a decent guy, but my problem is to beat a Robert Guerrero, you have to give some movement. And while Kamegai has skills and he can punch, he's hittable. He can be hit, and I don't know if he can give the angles. It has the hand speed to give Guerrero to beat Guerrero. It's going to be a fight. I think punches are going to land by both fighters, but I think at the end of the day, Guerrero is a little bit more skilled, a little bit more technical, and he may be too much for Kamegai. Your thoughts, Ken?
Yeah, I think both guys are going to get hit. I think Guerrero brings a little bit more skill to the table. Kamegai is the type of guy that comes forward, throws punches, has very little head movement, very little defense, very tough guy. I saw him fight a few times. I wasn't necessarily impressed. I believe he barely won one of those fights, and he lost a decision to a guy that's world champion now. He's a decent fighter. He's probably a B- fighter, but Guerrero, I think, should have enough to outbox him in stretches. But I think at some point there's going to be a lot of exchanges, and I think it should be a fun fight. But I'm going to go. I'm going to give the edge to Guerrero with his boxing build, and I think he wins a decision.
Interesting undercard bout, and I'm sorry, Sean, he have technical issues on his end, so he might not be able to make it.
Did he just tell you that?
Yeah, he just told me in a private. He said just send me in the chat, in the other chat, he sent me issues. He having technical issues on his end, so I don't know if he'll be able to make it back. Interesting fight between Vasyl Lomachenko, who in his quote unquote second professional fight lost to Orlando Salido, but gave a very good account of himself, fighting Gary Russell Jr. I think this fight is, I want to say it's for the WBO belt.
Yes, it is.
It is for at 126 pounds. A couple of years ago, I was very high on Gary Russell Jr. On the surface, he has the look of a guy who looks like a future world champ. He's fast, good hand speed, decent pop. But the problem is, for me, one, he's had hand issues in the past, and two, I question his competition. He hasn't fought anybody tough on the way to this bout. And I see Sean is back. And I'll go to you on this one, Sean. We're talking about Lomachenko and Gary Russell Jr. Your assessment of this fight, I think that this fight, even though I have my issues with Gary Russell, I think this fight is open. I think either guy can win. I really can't call a winner on this. On the surface, it looked like Lomachenko the favorite. But given Russell Jr.'s talent, I could see him actually winning this fight.
Yeah, it's a tough fight. I mean, Russell has fast hands. He's got some pop. I mean, he has the experience, mind you, against low-level competition. And he's fighting a guy who's only in his third fight, whereas I like Lomo, and he shows great defense, good hand speed, I mean, great technique. We will see how he competes with a guy who's totally different than the guy he just fought. I mean, he just fought a Salido who came in at 147 pounds, roughed him up, hit him low, did all the dirty pro tactics you could to get the victory. Now he's going to fight a guy who's going to be slicker, faster, younger. So completely different styles. So it'll be interesting. I think Russell's style sort of works for him better because he's not going to have to worry about such big thudding body blows. He's not going to get fouled nearly as much. I don't think Russell's speed necessarily is going to be anything that he hasn't seen in the amateurs. So I think his technical abilities should be able to give him enough to win. But I mean, regardless of how it goes, it should be a tough, close fight. And we will find out what both of them have, which is great.
And before I go to you, Kid, we were talking about American fighters to keep an eye on. I need to mention this guy. Errol Spence Jr. is another guy to keep an eye on at 147 pounds. But in terms of the Lomachenko Gary Russell Jr. fight, your thoughts?
I think it's going to be a boxing match, and I think Lomachenko wins the decision. I think he does enough. I think he'll be a little bit busier. I think Russell will have his moments, but I think sometimes he falls in love with one punch. I get that sense sometimes with Russell. And he has brittle hands. So we don't know when he's going to hurt his hand. He could hurt his hand at some point in the fight. And we'll know it, too, because he'll just start going for one shot. And that's his MO when he hurts his hand. He looks for one shot. He's never been 12 rounds. He's been 10. But he hasn't looked impressive in 10s. He hasn't looked impressive, even in some 8s. He hasn't looked, Lomachenko has proven he can go 12. He's also proven he can hang with upper-level competition. And I'm talking about the amateur days because he's fought everybody, the best amateurs in the world. He only lost one amateur fight in his entire career, allegedly. Allegedly, because we really don't know. But at the same time, he avenged that loss twice. So at the end of the day, I think Lomachenko has the experience, even though it lacks on the pro level. He's got a ton of experience as a boxer, and I think he does enough to win. I think it'll be a close competitive fight, but I think Lomachenko wins.
Also on this card on Showtime on Saturday, you have the return of Devon Alexander following his loss to Sean Porter, many consider it an upset. He returns to the ring against Soto Karass. On paper, Alexander should win. And I'll go to you on this, Kent, but why do I get the feeling that Alexander is going to lose this fight? I mean, of course, for me, Alexander, he's the boxer, whatever, but I just didn't like how he got roughed up and borderline punked by Soto Karass. And I think if Soto Karass can make it a physical fight, Alexander's in danger of falling victim to the rough physical fight again. Your thoughts, Ken?
I think if Soto Karass can make it a rough fight, he's going to win. Hands down, he's going to win the fight. The key is, can he catch Alexander? And Alexander's much quicker, and we know Soto Karass is not a fast guy at all. But he was able to catch up to Berto. But I think Berto is not as technically adept as Devon Alexander. So I'm going to just say this right now. And we know Berto's fast, but he's not as fast as Alexander. I'm going to say this. I think if Karass can catch up to Alexander, he can make it a rough fight, and he probably wins. If he doesn't, I think Alexander will stand on the outside and box his way to an easy victory.
I'll go to you on Sean. Look, Alexander should win, but am I wrong here in thinking that Soto Karass has a chance to beat him?
Well, you're not wrong, based on the fact that he lost to two guys that used a physical style to manhandle him. But what I think you might be forgetting is that those two guys actually had hand speed and foot speed and actually weren't so limited.
That's my point.
Bradley and Porter. The one guy that was more like Soto Karass, actually better than Soto Karass, Maidana, who has slow feet and slow hands but power and fights rough, he schooled him. And I figured this is going to be similar. I think Soto Karass will come and he'll be game and he will keep coming forward. He might even hit him with a few good shots, but I mean, Alexander has never shown that he's got a bad chin. You know, he's only been down by Matisse. So he just shows that they can stop his work rate, they can limit his effectiveness by being aggressive. But those guys also had skills and tools. I don't see Soto Karass giving anything that's going to give him too much problems.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Soto Karass is a very good story. I think he's a very workmanlike fighter. I think he's a worker bee. He does the best that he can with what he's got. But I don't think it'll be enough against a guy like Porter. I mean Alexander. It's not going to be enough. Not going to be nearly enough, unless Alexander gets dragged into a firefight, which could happen, because we've seen Alexander fight stupidly at times, and against guys that he should be able to handle easily, like for example Matisse. And you know, the only guy that we've seen him handle without getting into a firefight is Maidana. But other than that, he's been beaten. So at the end of the day, I think it all depends on Alexander's mindset. If he gets dragged into a firefight, Karass should win, which is probably about 20 or 30% chance of that happening, maybe even less. I see Alexander winning pretty comfortably by outboxing him.
And last fight on the night before we began to shut down the show, Chad Dawson returned against the ring against George Blades. Blades lost to Jean Pascal, I believe it was last year. Also lost a title shot against Erde a few years back, 6-7 years ago. Look, I know Dawson is coming off a knockout loss to Stevenson, coming off getting beat down by Andre Ward before that. But for me, I just think, based on what I've seen from Blades, even with Dawson in this vulnerable state, he should have his way here against George Blaze, who's just not on the level skill wise to give, as far as I'm concerned, Chad Dawson any problems here. Any of you guys can talk about it.
I'm gonna say this right now. Dawson should not lose this fight under any circumstances.
He should not. If he does, he just.
And if he struggles with this man, he should hang it up because George Blades is nothing but a club fighter with a very good record, and even his wins are not anything to scream about. I think this dude didn't this guy get punked by Zol Erdai?
Yeah, about 6-7 years ago, he got stopped in round 9 or round 11 in a title shot.
Yeah, he got beat by Erdai. He's gotten punked by Pascal after Pascal got off to a slow start. And I think anytime he stepped up to a level of Dawson, even if Dawson's past his best day, he's gotten punked. And I think Pascal is slightly past his best day, and Pascal punked him. So I see no reason why Dawson can't punk him. I think it'll end in a stoppage. I think the first couple of rounds, Dawson will come out cautious, But then once he starts heating up, I think he's going to take care of business. Listen, if anybody's ever seen George Blades, this man is just not a good fighter. He's just not a good fighter. It's embarrassing actually to watch him fight because, it's amazing. Watching him because he's like not even close to a B-level skill guy. I question if he's even a C-level skill guy at this point.
No, he's not.
I think it. Huh?
No, he's not.
No, I'm just being nice. Okay, but George Blades is gonna get punked bad, something awful. I don't see anything. This is the one fight on this card that's likely to go one way is definitely the Dawson fight, and some of the other undercard fights that are having just prospects. It's gonna go one way, but the 10-round fight is gonna go one way, and that's with Dawson, and that's gonna be Dawson flattening him.
Yeah, I'll go to you on this one, Sean. Dawson, he should have no problems at all. He should stop Blades, or at least win an impressive decision. And if he doesn't, something's seriously wrong here.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a tune-up fight to get him busy, to get him active, to get some rust shaken off of him so that he can get prepared for another big fight. I mean, like they're saying, if he loses this fight, then basically he should just hang him up. But I mean, I don't see that happening. This fight is made for him to win, made for him to get back on the scene and become a player in a great division, 175. So I look forward. I mean, I don't think he's shot. I mean, he's a good boxer. He just needs to use what he has and not think that he's something else.
Right, and I also think that his confidence may have been shaken after that Ward fight. So we don't. I think he's past his best day, but I don't think he's shot. I think he's a little bit past his prime, and that I don't think he's shot. Like there's a lot. That word "shot" is used so much in boxing, and eventually, after a while, after people kept calling Johnny Gonzalez shot, I really wanted to slap him because they don't understand.
Well, people don't. People use it, but they don't know the real definition.
Right. Let me tell you something. You want to know who shot? You want to know who shot the shit? James Toney. That's a guy that shot the shit. You want to know?
Right.
You want another guy that's another example of a guy that shot the shit? Roy Jones. That's another guy that shot the shit. Even though he's winning, at least he knows what level to compete on. James Toney doesn't understand that. He still thinks he can compete on an elite level, which he can't. But that's the point is, Dawson is not shot. Yeah, Mosley was another guy that was, Jesus.
Yeah, there's a big gap between a guy who's a little bit past his prime and shot. That's just a whole nother category. In terms of Dawson, I believe I agree with you. I don't think he's shot physically. It's an issue of confidence. This fight right here, it's just a fight to help build his confidence. That's all.
Right. I think his biggest mistake was, I'll be honest, jumping right back in the ring with a guy like Stevenson.
Yes.
That was a mistake. And I think that's why he took some time off to rest his mind, to just to recuperate and get his mind right. And I think this is a good way to come back against a guy that simply has no business being in the ring with him. That's the way you should do things. If Al Heyman's going to do anything for Dawson, at least he's going to build him back the right way. That's what he specializes in. I think a lot of these, these type of fights. I'm not going to go further, but because I don't want to hate on anybody, but yeah, I think it's going to be. I think Dawson's going to come back. I wouldn't be surprised if you see him in there with Lushan Bluch at some point. I think he can get back to where he was. I don't think he'll ever be the top guy again, but I think he can get back into the mix in the top 10.
Actually, I like that fight. I really do.
Yeah, I think that would be a good fight. I think a rematch with him and Pascal would be a good fight. I think there's a lot of guys he can beat. I think he can beat. I think he can even beat Shumanov. Yeah, even another opportunity at Hopkins. You never know in this game. That would be, and guess what? I'm sure Hopkins would love that fight because he would want.
And here's the thing: in both of their fights, Dawson has the style and the physical makeup to give Hopkins trouble. Tall southpaw who has speed and can punch. It gave Hopkins problems in the first fight, even though it was short. It really gave Hopkins problems in the second fight, and they could fight 10 times. And based on style and physical attributes alone, a Chad Dawson could, if he doesn't get hit with a big punch, a Chad Dawson could give Hopkins a tough fight all 10 times.
Oh, absolutely. But you know what? I know Hopkins is a competitor. Deep down inside him, he's a competitor. And he can't, when he loses to somebody, he wants to win that fight. He's competitive. He wants to redeem himself. And I think that's a possibility. Anything's possible at this point with Dawson, especially if he looks good against Blades. Then they can move him the right way and maybe I think he gets right back in the top 10. I don't think he's shot. I think he maybe passes a little bit past his prime, but I don't think he's shot. I think he can still fight.
Yeah, and on that note, I think we're going to shut the show down. Before we close the show down, however, I want to give you guys an opportunity to let people know where they can find you in Talk Boxing. I'll start with our guest, Sean, over in Taiwan, live in Taiwan. Let the people know where they can find you on social media, email, or whatever, in case they want to talk boxing with you.
You can find me on Google. You can find me on YouTube. Sean Newton.
Yeah, and then kid, let the folks know where they can find you when they want to chop it up and talk boxing with you.
You can find me at facebook.com/kent.ayers.1. That's where you can find me. I'm on some of the Facebook pages like No Holds Barred. And I'm around those pages, so you'll see me around. But that's my Facebook account. That's where you can reach me to talk boxing.
So y'all know what it is. If you want to follow me at Brother JR on Twitter. Well, at MICWILJRSC. Brother JR is the handle. You want to talk to me about boxing and whatnot. Or you can check out the most Pound for Pound Boxing Report pages all over social media, on Facebook, on Google+, especially. I'm on there a lot. Not this Google+ page where we do the show, but the other Pound for Pound Boxing Report where I do the show and post my blog stuff. You can find me on the Twitter handle as well, at P4P Boxing Report. So again, that's where you can find us where you want to talk boxing. On the next episode of the Pound for Pound Boxing Report, we will do a recap of Guerrero, Kamegai, of Lomachenko, Russell Jr., of Devon Alexander versus Soto, Karass, and Chad Dawson versus George Blades. We will talk about a very significant fight, as I'm concerned, happening on June 28th, as Terrence Crawford makes his first title defense against Yorkis Gamboa. As far as I'm concerned, possibly the two top lightweights in the world. The fight's going to be held in Crawford's hometown of Omaha, Nebraska. It's going to be on HBO. So we will talk heavy about that, do a big-time preview on that. I want to thank Sean for joining us again live from Taiwan. Thank Ken for joining us again. Co-host Ken for being on with me again. For my co-host Ken, for my special guest Sean, my host Michael, this has been another episode of the Pound for Pound Boxing Report. You guys have a good evening. Good night.
Good night.